And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. I'm your host, Sam Dunning, co-owner over at webchoiceuk.com. And if you haven't yet, check out my weekly email where I'm sharing actionable website and marketing tips, useful podcasts, free goodies, and much, much more each and every Monday to kick off your week with a bang. Why not give it a trial over at businessgrowth.emails. Joining me today, I've got Linda Melone. Linda's the founder over at the Worx. Linda, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all, Linda. So we're going to be chatting today some simple ways on how everyone tuning in can write high converting copy content that's going to drive some leads, drive some revenues, drive some new customers for their business. So first and foremost, what actually is conversion copywriting? I see this term thrown around all over social, all over different platforms. What does it really mean, Linda?
Well, the thing is, some people have argued with me and said, oh, it's the same, copywriting is copywriting. It's not true because you can niche down to different types of copywriting. So conversion copywriting that is geared specifically to help businesses create or generate more revenue. So you can have, as opposed to, it's often compared to direct response copywriting. Direct response, just to kind of differentiate, those are the ads you see all over the place. It's like they don't take into account really the audience. It's like, think of a fast food ad, for example. It's not geared to a specific audience. It's very general, where what I do is very specific to creating revenue. Everything I do is based on decision-making psychology and that sort of thing.
Got it. So does that mean this type of content, as opposed to, like you say, being quite generic, like some adverts that you might see for broader companies like McDonald's, Burger King, etc., whereas this is different in the fact that it's geared towards a certain audience that we want to take a particular action? Is that the kind of premise or the goal of it?
Yeah, there's a lot to it, but it's geared. There's premises like, for example, the stages of awareness I take into account, which is, where is that person in their decision-making journey? So you've probably heard this, like unaware, somebody who doesn't know they have a problem. Pain aware is typically when people start thinking, okay, I have an issue, I have a challenge, I need to resolve it. And then you have like solution aware, most aware. And so the copy that I write is geared to that particular stage of that person's decision making. And the way I would know it is if somebody says, listen, people are coming from a Facebook ad. Okay, so they're product aware. They know what you offer. So you don't have to write as much. So that page would be written differently than the homepage, for example, which captures everyone.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting actually to chat about perhaps how you deal with copy from different audiences, like whether that audience is cold, i.e. they're coming from an ad that they never heard of your brand, whether they're warm and they've perhaps been following your brand somewhere, whether that's social, LinkedIn, another platform for a while, and then they're coming to your site or your landing page. Yeah, that would certainly be interesting to chat about that type of traffic and how you deal with that in terms of your copy shortly. But is copy really that important when it comes to getting people to convert? I thought you had to just have a really nice design and you could sling a few words, sling a call to action there, maybe chuck a form, and then people will probably inquire with you, right?
Wrong, but a lot of people think that. So copy is often called like your 24/7 online salesperson. So your copy is on your website. If we're talking about websites, because copy could be email, it could be ads, could be anything. But on your website, it's there when you're sleeping. It's there all the time, so that when someone lands on your site, the person who lands there doesn't have the opportunity to speak to you. So that copy has to say whatever it is that you want it to say to capture their attention and hopefully take action. So it's very important. And it works along with the design, like the two things go together.
Yeah. I know we spoke about this a little bit when I came on your show quite recently, but what's your thoughts? So if people are putting together landing pages or are putting together websites, do you think the content always needs to come first? Is there ever a situation where the design can be crafted and then content can be added later, or they can be done simultaneously?
It's supposed to be, the copy is supposed to determine the design. Personally, I like to have kind of an idea of what the design is or what the previous design was, if it's like for a new website. But I will usually take off on different directions. For example, a lot of what I do is kind of walking people through the pain that they're currently in before I offer the solution. And if the page is very short, um, and that's the way the design is, it can be hard for me to work around that. So yeah, the copy really should determine the design, but I like to work hand in hand with the designer to kind of come up with a solution that works for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, I guess if you can get a rough idea of what the visuals are gonna look like so you know what's gonna go where, and then if you can, like you say, start crafting the copy out. Because if you don't know how big the design is gonna be, maybe there's too much text, too little text, and the website just looks off or gets thrown out and all this annoying things that I experience when I'm working on web projects, so I completely get that. Now, jumping back to what we were talking about now, a little bit earlier, in terms of, because like you say, with visitors, doesn't matter if they're going to a website, to a landing page, or seeing your content in the LinkedIn feed, how can copy affect from a conversion standpoint of view, or how can it be put to best use when it comes to dealing with a cold audience? And feel free to perhaps use maybe someone that's just seeing your company for the first time, maybe clicking a Google ad, or maybe clicking a social ad or something like that, or maybe seeing you in the LinkedIn feed, through to someone that's perhaps more warm, where they've perhaps been following your brand for a long time, whether that is on social media, maybe they've been reading your emails, your weekly emails, or listening to a podcast, and then they're going to a page. How do cold audiences compare to warm, I guess, is the first point, and then how should your copy, your content be created to cater to for almost both?
Well, if someone is unaware of your solution or service, that you need to provide them with more information than someone who is already aware of what you do. So this is why you see, and there's a lot of talk a lot about these really long form sales pages, and people are, these pages are so long. That's because a long form sales page is taking someone from one stage of awareness, which is sometimes unaware, they don't know what your product or service does, and takes them through all the stages of awareness. So by the time they get to the bottom, they know that your product is the one for them. So if you have someone who's coming from an ad, for example, you want them to go to a page that doesn't have all that preemptive information, because they're like, all right, just tell me where the buy button is, I'm ready, I want to go. So you have to know where they're coming from. And the hardest page, for this reason, the hardest page to write is the homepage, because your homepage is like, I always refer to it as like if you walk into a big business center and there's the information desk, and that homepage is going to tell you where you're going to go. It
Yep.
doesn't focus on one particular thing. But so you need to kind of capture. You have to know what it is, where they're coming from, and
Yep.
then it determines how much information that they need.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah, we can break down best practices. So, are you saying if someone's warm, the impression I got there, if they've perhaps familiar with your brand, or they're perhaps ready to, they know that they've got this particular issue, so maybe they've searched on Google, i.e., I need X provider, or I need help with this. They come to your page. You want to make it as quick as possible for them to actually take the desired action. Whereas if you're dealing with someone that's perhaps earlier in the sales process, perhaps they don't know your brand, perhaps they're doing more research, or perhaps they're comparing options, then the copy, the page needs to work harder to kind of leverage the problem, leverage the issue, and then show how you're best fitted to actually tackle it. Is that
Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so
Okay.
it's and the thing is, I think we've talked about this in the past, is how people can go from an unaware stage to a most aware, which is the other end of the spectrum. If it's something that, I think I use the example a lot of a plumber. Don't think about your plumbing until all of a sudden your pipes burst, and now it's like, okay, I did not even know I had a problem, and now it's like I need somebody now. So then you want to have that page that just says what they need. Yeah, you don't want to take them through, the pain of what they just are going through, and they don't want to hear
Yeah.
about that. It's like, I know where I am.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You just want to make it as easy as possible for them to get the job done, get it fixed. Makes sense. How do you think copy content stacks up against things like social proof? Because I know when we're building out web pages, we're building out landing pages, social proof like testimonials, examples, reviews, accreditations, companies worked with logos, and those kind of things. What do you think is like the weight between the actual words you write and then using examples of people that you've helped to kind of build trust? How do you think, is there like a weighting of what's more important, or what works harder?
They need to go together, and by that I mean, and this is one of the mistakes I see often, is the testimonials are a lot of times just sprinkled on a page just randomly, but you want to use them strategically. So in other words, if you're talking about something that your product does that is proven, it can be backed up by a testimonial, you want to have the social proof or testimonial right below that copy so that it backs up what you just said. So, if somebody's
Hmm.
talking about your website development service, and then maybe you hit on a specific point about why you're different, and then the testimonial below that would ideally be someone who can back that up and says, yeah, this is what happened. And it just sort of solidifies the point before it. We
Got it.
don't always have those ideal testimonials is the problem, so it's hard, but you want to try to weave them together that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So try and make it relevant for the
Right.
piece of information that was just before it. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So move forward. What are some of the biggest mistakes? What are some of the biggest issues when it comes to, let's say, in a B2B, maybe a software or a service provider environment? What are some of the main red flags or issues that people should avoid when it comes to their content or their copy?
The biggest issue that I find, and the one that I am hired for the most, is to get the messaging down. And so value proposition. What is it that makes your product or service different than everyone else? And a lot of times, if it's something like a web development company where there's so many competitors, it can take a lot of time to dig into, what are other people saying about your competitors? And it's the research that will pull that out. So that's number one, is that I find the value proposition, it either isn't upfront and center on the page, like the homepage, or it's not clear. A lot of times we want to have like an overarching statement to get more people, but it actually works against you. You want to really niche down to
Yeah,
what.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. What do you think makes a good value prop? For example, let's say a website homepage headline. What's the difference between a good and a bad one?
One, there's actually 5 criteria for a value prop. And this is like the scorecard that I use when I create them for my own clients. It needs to be unique. It needs to be desirable, something that people want. It should be very specific, which is where a lot of people drop the ball. Succinct, to the point, and then memorable. Like the most famous one is the M&M, melts in your mouth, not in your hands kind of thing. That was supposed to be like, I heard that's the original value prop. It says everything in that one sentence. So that's like, I literally use a scorecard when I'm creating a value prop. Is it memorable? Is it, desirable? And so on. So those are the ways to really measure your value prop.
Yeah. And to dive into that a bit deeper, are there any tips for a business that perhaps wants to find these things out to actually make something that's going to be memorable, desirable? I mean, the specific, I suppose they can work out for themselves by being clear on what it is they do and who they help. Are there any ideas around how they can gather that information or
Mhm.
source that data to then put into a juicy value proposition that's actually going to make them stand out from the hundreds of thousands of competitors that they might have that are perhaps trying to do similar?
I mean, it's the research, but out of all the research, I always talk about, I have a 50-point checklist that I use for my research, which is
Okay.
that's my value prop, is that that's how deep I go into it. But part of that, and the most important part, in my opinion, is the conversations you have with your customers.
Hmm.
And so many times I'll be interviewing someone and they'll say something about the, my client, that immediately I know this is going to be part of the value proposition because it's exactly what I'm looking for. And
Yeah.
so you want to be able to back up everything you say. And this goes for all your copy, by the way. It's not just the value prop, but everything should be backed up by either analytics, um, all the research, your customers, ask yourself, would your customer say this? Because a lot of times I see a headline and say, no one's ever using those words. Like, do they wake up and say, I want, whatever it is that you have there? And if not, then you need to find out what they're saying and what your competitors are saying, or what your competitors are doing, and what people are not getting from your competition. So you got to fill that gap in.
Yeah. Cool. Linda, I want to do something a bit different. and hopefully you're up for it because we're halfway through a recording now. I want to do a live actionable takeaway. So I want to, let's pretend let's keep it B2B. Let's say we're a service-based business. I always say CRM. So let's say we're a niche CRM service, but maybe the CRM we're providing is for what industries shall we pick? I quite often say financial companies. So maybe we'll say, yeah, CRM for financial organizations, let's say. Nice boring topic. So let's say we do that, but let's say we're approaching, our website's like 6-7 years old. So we've realized that we need to kind of completely redesign all the main pages. We need something fresh. We need something that provides leads for our sales team. So we definitely need converting copy. What are the first steps that we need to take before we start putting words to pen to paper or employ someone to do? What are the kind of initial steps right through to actually creating the copy that we need to follow?
The first thing I do, well, the very first thing is a discovery call with the client. And this is like an hour-long process of digging into questions about their customer that they probably haven't even thought about. And then the second thing, I get the analytics where, so it's kind of the left brain and the right brain research that I do. So the left brain is all the analytics. What is actually happening? Where are people dropping off? What is that page or pages? Or even, what's the call to action that's not working? And then, as I just mentioned, I ask for customer, references, like who can I talk to?
Okay.
And that's the first thing. And then I just start, I go through social media. Like 80% of what I do is the research. And
Okay.
once I get that done, the copy almost writes itself, but those are the things. So I ask for a lot from the client. And a lot of times that's the hardest part because it takes time to really nail all that down.
Yeah.
Is that what
Yeah. Yeah.
does that answer your question? Like, because
That's
it's kind
certainly
of
a help.
broad.
I'm going to dig into that some more if I may. So that research, so 80% is research, which I'm sure a lot of people that's going to be quite a shocking stat. Because I know when I first thought of content, I thought, hey, I don't need to do that much research. You can just start writing about how great your company is. But it
Oh, it should be so easy.
it turns out that's not necessarily the best way. As typically people are going to want to know what's in it for them, or how you're going to help them. So yeah, you mentioned talking to the client directly and then kind of doing customer interviews and things like that. So if we could kind of delve into that in a bit more depth, as in what we're trying to look for and why we're interviewing them and what the kind of things we should be asking, so we can kind of help our audience understand kind of what should these interviews be like? What do we want to learn? What's the point of it? And what are the takeaways? I know that's a long-winded question.
For the discovery call with the client or the customers or both?
I guess both.
Well, what I'll do is I'll hit on the ones on the client side, the questions that I find are hardest to answer, because I do this on Zoom, and so I can always tell when someone just has no idea. What is the voice? What's your brand voice or your ideal customer's voice? And what, how do they perceive you and how do you want to be perceived? Those are, I mean, I ask like 50 questions. So those are the ones that pop up. Otherwise, it's, I do talk about demographics and all the things that you would expect, but I
Sure.
really dive into what is the mindset of the person who you're trying to attract. And so with the customers, I try to keep these calls to 15 minutes because people really, usually they're executive level and they really don't want to waste a lot of time. So I get right into what made you make the decision to go with this company? Who
Okay.
else and what else did you try before this? Who are their competitors and why, what was that tipping point that made you go in this direction?
Okay.
And then what's the before and after picture of what was the challenge and how are things now? And those are
Yeah.
probably the most important ones.
Okay. So talking about different points along these customers' experience with the brand, with the client, and why they picked with them, how they helped,
Right.
results. Is there like a typical amount of clients that you tend to recommend people interview, like a number of clients?
I usually talk to 7 to 10 people, and I'll know if it's enough when everyone starts saying the same thing. And so I will try changing the questions around, but a lot of times working with a client right now where I've interviewed 7 people and there's very similar things that they're saying. And I know that that's going to be in their copy. But sometimes it's a little bit more than that. But I'll start with like 20 people because most people will bail or they'll say I'll talk to you and then they don't, because
Yeah,
we're all busy, and then it's like what's in
sure.
it for them? It's like, well, if they really love the solution, which in this case they did, if they really love, the results they got, they'll be happy to talk, but
Yeah.
not always.
Yeah, yeah, it's not always that easy to get people for interviews for sure. I
Yeah.
understand that. So, are there certain things we should be looking out for as well when we're asking these questions? Are we looking for, like you mentioned there, patterns in what people are saying? Do we need to record the sessions or make vigorous notes with our pen and paper, or what's a kind of recommended process there?
I record them and then go back. I use Otter.ai. I think
Okay,
yeah. And so it transcribes as they're talking. The
nice.
things that I like to really look for is the emotion, because that's how
Hmm.
people make decisions. If I'm sure you've heard, it's like we make decisions based on emotion, justify with logic. So I try to get into that, and that can be a little hard,
Yep.
especially if it's someone who's very kind of guarded. And I've had people get on the phone with me who are suspicious of why I'm even talking to them. So I have to say, listen, I'm not going to quote you. I'm just gathering information. But how did you feel about that? Um, how did it kind of change your life? Because everyone gives a surface answer like, oh, well, this, I improved X, tremendously. And what was that like? And that's when you get the really the good stuff and the good copy.
Yep. Yep. So diving deeper to kind of
Yeah.
surface level answers
Yeah.
to get to the root of it. Gotcha. Okay. So we do these calls, we record them. What happens next, in terms of kind of using that information, using what we've learned, what we've gathered, putting that together? Do we then chuck some of it on a page, or what's kind of the process?
So I I have a system that I use where I just start categorizing. I use a platform called airstory.co, and it's made for writers and copywriters. So I will tag every quote, like I'm in the process of doing this right now with a couple people, and just like, say, for example, somebody says, talks about a pain point that really made them, make this decision. I'll hashtag that pain, put it in a column, and then I just start assembling the whole thing, because copywriting is really more about assembly than it is about writing. It's assembling
Okay.
all those pieces. I will choose what I think would be a good formula, which copywriting formula is the most popular one is PAS, problem, agitation, solution, if that's appropriate. So we start with the pain. What is the problem or the pain point? I'll put all those together.
Yep.
How can we agitate it? What is the actual scenario behind that? And then the solution. And that's usually the sequence. I mean, there's like 25 different formulas you can use, but I usually start with that one because it's easiest and it's also user relevant. When it comes to SaaS, though, sometimes you can start with a solution. Again, it depends on where they're coming from, what page it's for, or but usually you do the value prop at the top of the page, so you immediately
Okay.
grab their attention. But those formulas, so then I just start arranging and assembling all of those pieces into that formula, and start editing from there, pulling out what I think I need and deleting what doesn't work. It's a
Yeah.
process and it's a lot.
It's
It's a
yeah.
lot.
It sounds quite detailed from what you're showing me now.
Yeah,
Um, like basically going through the recordings of the calls, tagging them up, what's relevant to each section, like what's relevant. I know you just laid out a
right.
framework there: problem, agitation, solution. What's perhaps relevant to the problem or the issue they faced?
Exactly.
What then provokes that problem, and then what talks about the solution, how you help them. So it sounds like kind of gathering all these words that they're using, putting them together in relevant categories and subcategories, so they're all nicely organized and
Right.
together. Which sounds like something I'd be terrible at when it comes to organization, so probably not one for me. And then okay, so we organize them all, and then did you say just start kind of laying them out on the page, starting with the value proposition? Is that the way to go, or?
I usually come up with a few. Like, there's usually, because people want choices, so I'll come up with usually 3 value props I think would work. Because all of this is presented, of course, to the client, and then I get their feedback. And if they say something's really off base, which is rare, I mean, it's because it's all based on research. It's not like it's my opinion, but
Yeah.
and then we just talk about what works and what doesn't. And one of the things, and I've posted about this on LinkedIn, is that saying I don't like it isn't a legit critique. If the copy is based on because ego comes into play, and a lot of times it's maybe the words are not something you would use, but your customers have used it. So you have to be able to back it up. So I actually have a clause in my contract that says, please limit feedback to legal. If somebody says this isn't going to fly with the legal department, or if it's not clear, or there's something that's just obviously wrong with the statement,
Yep.
then we can talk about it. But if it's just, you know what, I don't like this, because people, especially if there's all gathered around, and I had this is something I heard in a book about marketing that said, people sit around in boardrooms and inhale their own fumes. It's like, they love, oh, we're all bouncing things off, and this sounds great. And it doesn't matter how it sounds if your customers have said it and it's backed by research.
Yeah. I suppose what you could say in that case is that's fine, but we interviewed like 10 customers and they all said this was their problem. So why don't we just use the words out of the customers' mouths? Because they're the
At
people
least
buying our
test
shit.
it. Yeah, I said just test it, and if you're right, I mean, it'll prove. I mean, it's not, I don't have an ego attached to it. This is what your customer said.
Mm.
And if you put it out there, and sometimes it doesn't, if the value prop is already strong, and some people do come to me and they don't have a lot, that I think I can really fix, you may not see a big jump in conversions. But if someone's very vague, and then I come up with something that, is much more specific, it can make a huge difference. So it
Yep.
depends on what they already have and that kind of thing too.
Yep. And how much of this is using the actual phrases or words that our customers that we've interviewed, our clients, prospects that we've interviewed, and then positioning them on a page? So let's say, for example, we're working on a homepage. So we've just done the value prop that we talked about then. And then maybe as we go down the page, perhaps we've got to talk about the services. Perhaps we've got to talk about how it's going to fix a problem or how it's going to improve their life, and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
How much of that is just literally using what the customer says? How much of it do we need to craft ourselves if we're putting together the content? What's the kind of flow for the rest of the page in that situation?
Well, usually I have an idea of what I want to say for that particular paragraph or sentence. And so it depends on, because I don't put direct quotes, but I will use the words and kind of weave it into the messaging. So it's kind of hard to describe, but
Sure.
yeah, it really depends. But I
Yep.
always have it in mind, because when I do all that research, it's not just that I'm writing all the stuff down, but I'm absorbing everything. Like, I'm
Mm.
good at remembering stuff. So it's kind of the voice. Is this the voice of the customer? Would they say this? And then I double check myself. I'll go back and forth. It's really a back and forth process. And if I do if sometimes I write things and I think this sounds really good, and then I think, okay, I like it, but it's just now my ego's getting in the way. No, this isn't what they would say, and I have to take it out. And that's
Gotcha.
probably the hardest thing about writing. It's not always what you want to say, it's what they want to hear. So
Yeah, I like that take. And from your experience, appreciate every situation, every company is going to be a bit different, but how much of an impact does this tend to have when you do the process that you've just laid out for us there, as opposed to just letting a company go with whatever the heck they think is going to be great and just writing their own copy at free will? What's the kind of difference in impact from from some of the clients that you've worked with and results that you've seen?
well, it's harder to measure on something like a landing page or a website page, because it's not as quickly converting versus an email or an ad.
Right.
So emails, they go out, you immediately can get, what's the open rate? What's the click rate? I've had as much as like 30% on a lot of the work that I've done. Some of it, like the website copy that I've done, like the recent ones, I'm actually waiting to hear back from some people, but it can take like months, like 6 months to really see, a difference in the analytics. So it depends. I've had like registrations there was someone I was working with, and they had a webinar they wanted registrants to sign up for, and they had a 50% increase. But, it depends on, there's so much that goes into it beforehand. That's why I can't offer
Yeah.
guarantees, because people are, oh, well, what can you do for me? I don't know how engaged your audience is. I don't know what you've done before. So yeah, it depends on the audience, especially with emails. Because some
Yep.
people are like, well, I haven't emailed my list in, a year, and this literally has happened. And now I want you to do an email sequence, and let's see how it goes. Like, well, there's no baseline, in that situation.
Yeah, and I guess this is my interpretation of it, Linda, and feel free to tell me that I'm completely wrong because I don't mind. Is like, let's say in a website example, because that's my space, is that copy is certainly a huge element. There's no doubt in my mind on that. But then there's also a lot of outside factors, i.e., is the website getting a decent amount of traffic,
Right.
visitors in the first place? Are they the right type of audience? Are they people that are actually interested in your stuff? Are they searching on Google for what you do? Are they quite targeted? Or are they just coming from all kinds of channels with no clue about what you do? Thus meaning they're not even in your ideal client profile. And therefore, no matter how good your content is, they're never going to convert because they don't even want to see what you do. They've just flicked
Right.
onto your site and bounced straight off. So things like that. And then as we go on, your website needs to kind of load fast, have a engaging design, build some trust, make it easy for people to get in touch. So there's a few other outside factors, I suppose, that the content can't always be blamed for.
There's a lot. And I actually, as you were talking, I was thinking, I usually tell people 10% is a good amount of a conversion increase. It
Yep.
depends on, again, what it is. What I mean, it could be 0 to 50%. I mean, and it's also like when it comes to email, how many
Yeah.
people are on the list? That makes a difference.
Sure.
I mean, if you have 100 or if you have 1,000, and again, how engaged are they? So yeah, it's hard on landing pages. I wish it were easier because I'd like to have more stats on that, and I don't yet. Except people like what I'm doing, and they're saying they're seeing more traffic, and they're seeing people staying on it long. That's the other thing. You look at bounce rate, and where are they bouncing? Where are they going, landing on, and not getting the information that they want?
Yeah. I suppose the good thing about this though is because you're going to your target customers, you're understanding what the reason why they chose the product or service, you're understanding what they actually care about, you're understanding how they describe the offering, what they're getting out of it. So you're doing the best possible first standpoint for what we've been talking about, landing pages and websites. And then it's basically saying that we're in a great position because we're basically gearing it up for the target clients who want to interact. And then over time, we can measure things like website analytics, how well things convert. And if we wanted to make tweaks, we can. But it
Right.
means that we're putting us in the best kind of solid position from day one, really.
Yeah. And even like the value prop, people get nervous and they say, oh, the value prop means I can't change it. And you can change it. I mean, you have to, it's always about testing with marketing. I mean, and that's what I tell people if they start pushing back on the copy. It's like, well, just let's test this against this and see how they perform. That's always
Yeah.
the answer. It's like, I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's it. Definitely test. That's one of the biggest things. That's great, Linda. I think we've gone through quite a nice little framework there that people can take away and put into play when it comes to writing their own site copy. Any final points for anyone that's still not quite convinced that they should go under this process or that they think they're very, very capable of writing all their content internally?
For one, it's like I said, you should try it. But if your messaging is off, everything's off. I've had people tell me, I've been working at this business for 3 years and I still can't get my messaging right. And nothing's going to work until you get the copy, the messaging, and your value prop super clear.
Yeah. Nicely put. Well, that's it from us, Linda. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you
Thank you.
sharing your knowledge and your insights and thoughts around content and copywriting to convert with us today. With that said, please do tell us more about how everyone tuning in can connect with you, more about your business, and the best way to get in touch.
My website is thecopyworks.com, WORX.com, or you can email me at linda@thecopyworks.com. I have my own podcast, which Sam's going to be on soon. And that is the B2B marketing and copywriting podcast. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm very active on there.
Awesome. And we'll put all of those links over in the show notes at businessgrowth.marketing. And with that, thanks once again for coming on, Linda. Enjoyed the
Thank
chat.
you.
No worries. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, why not leave us a quick rating on your audio podcast channel? Or if you're tuning in on YouTube, a subscribe goes a long way. And with that, we should catch you on the next one for more actionable, no BS marketing tips to grow your business and grow your revenue. Cheers for tuning in.